Yeah, absolutely explain that because I'm hearing new information that I've actually never heard before. You're saying that we have two different brains?
We had three different brains. We
Three
had the
different brains.
reptilian brain, the mammalian brain, and we had the prefrontal cortex.
Welcome, welcome, welcome back, everybody, to Health and Wellness Mondays, presented to you by Federal Way Black Collective, where we discuss culture collectively. I want to welcome back our featured guest, Mr. Alfred White, here to edify us once again on another fine Monday with what I have experienced as a plethora of information that deals directly with my own personal childhood trauma, the childhood trauma of minorities as a whole. What you can expect from Mr. White is pure edification when it comes to the information being presented. And I can't thank him enough for being here and giving us his time. What we will be discussing today as a topic is adverse childhood experiences. Um, I'm going to be the first to say that when it came to mental health, I was very, I had my own personal wall, my own personal feelings about it. I kept it at a distance because as a black man, you're supposed to be, strong, and you're supposed to be tough all the time. You're supposed to, bottle things up and be that courageous individual, as you move through everyday life when at the same time, those that type of mentality can break you down over time. I am, firsthand, experiencer of that. So with Mr. White here, I want you guys to take a journey with us in healing. This isn't about just spewing a whole bunch of information at the audience, hoping something will stick. This is about, walking hand in hand with each other and learning with each other because I'm not going to act like I know everything. Neither is Mr. White because as we learn, as we spew this information, we're also learning at the same time. I dealt with, I was born and raised in Chicago, South Side, Kenwood to be exact. So when it comes to the topic of adverse, childhood adverse experiences, being a young black man in Chicago, I can tell you vividly stories, running up and down the streets, people being shot, people being robbed. I stayed across the street, if any, I'm kind of aging myself from Robert Taylor at housing projects at one point. My aunt lived over there, so yeah. When it comes to this subject, this is something that touches near and dear to my heart. I'm not going to give you guys the whole sad sob story because that's not what we're here for today. We're here to jump into the science of mental health, learn what it actually does to our physiology, how it breaks us down mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, all of the above. So, with that being said, I can't wait to get into what Mr. White has presented us for us today with his presentation.
Hey, Dre, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm glad you expounded on that like that because that's really the elephant in the room. It's the science. We keep going to medical doctors expecting appropriate answers, and it's not happening. And the reason why it's not happening because it's based on WBC, white body culture. Instead of African American culture, and so that brought me to the segue of Dr. Joy DeGroove's book, and she's got a quote in there. It's called Cassandra Igra, and How Are the Children? Among the most accomplished and fabled tribes in Africa, no tribe was considered to have warriors more fearsome or more intelligent than the mighty Messiah. It's perhaps surprising then to learn the traditional greeting that passed between Messiah warriors, and one would always say to another, it means, and how are the children? And that's something that we really need to focus on today. And so I'm coming right out of Dr. Joyce DeGroove's book, The Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And one of the reasons why I'm doing this is because the League of Extraordinary People is logo is the Sankofa bird. And the Sankofa, we must return and claim our past in order to move toward our future. It is in understanding who we were that will free us to embrace who we are now, the meaning of Sankofa. and that's to return and get it. And so we can't keep looking at yesterday trying to see tomorrow, because it's not going to happen, you guys. We've been here, and epigenetics has happened to us. We don't have our culture with us. And so we've been actually living our lives based off of white body culture. And I think some of you guys know today that sometimes the culture and facts get misconstrued. And so ACEs science, and it talks about the 3 realms of ACEs, it's talking about the household, the environment, and the community. And so this has been invented and created off of white body culture, where we can look and see that we didn't get a chance to start voting until 1968. And then you just seen what just happened in 2021 when it comes down to voting. So adverse childhood experiences and the environment, the household, and the community is what's got us trapped. It's really got us trapped. So when you look at the household, and you got somebody in a household that's divorced, homeless, parental mental illness, alcoholism, drug abuse, emotional, sexual abuse, domestic violence, maternal depression, bullying, physical and emotional neglect, and an incarcerated family member, how is it going to be healthy to navigate around the household when you live in a community that's full of discrimination, historical trauma, substandard schools? And that historical trauma is really, really, really important, you guys. And the reason why I say that is it's really important because a lot of us don't even understand the link between the historical and transgenerational trauma that's involved in our bodies. A lot of us, when we're sitting here talking and we're looking at ACEs, we're looking at the environment, we're looking at the community of substandard wages, lack of jobs, poverty, poor housing quality, and affordability. You guys are not even thinking about the fact that this is based on a totally different culture than ours. When you look at the poor housing and quality, you say, well, how does that factor in, Alfred? Well, that factors into your health care. Everything on this 3 realms of ACEs, they're all factors into your health care. So that's the big thing, you guys. We go to the medical doctors talking about our health care, but medical doctors are about 20 years behind. If you want to go to a doctor that really has your best interest at heart, go to a functional medicine doctor. They're natural healers. If we went to a natural healer and we start talking about ACEs, the first thing they would do is to first of all tell us that part of our brain that's controlling our emotions and stuff is actually our mammalian brain. It has nothing to do with our prefrontal cortex. And then we have another level of brain called a reptilian brain. And so the mammalian brain, no matter what, either real or imagined, it can override our cognitive brain. So we'll end up doing things because it's our mammalian brain. So a lot of us keep running around here and we're trying to help ourselves from the top down, but it has nothing to do with our mammalian brain. And if you'd like to, Dre, I can explain that in more detail. I can't hear you, Dre.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, absolutely explain that, because I'm hearing new information that I've actually never heard before. You're saying that we have 2 different brains?
We had 3 different brains. We had the reptilian brain, the mammalian brain, and we had the prefrontal cortex. And so on every level, it's a different level of management. And so what's going on in the reptilian brain? Well, here's the reptilian brain. And the reptilian brain is located at the base of the skull and is in charge of all the human functions we do not have conscious control over. Did you hear me? We do not have conscious control over. The brain stem regulates our breathing, our digestion, our reflex responses, our blood pressure, our bowels and bladder control. The cerebellum, it coordinates our balance, our voluntary movements and posture. The basal ganglia assists in coding procedural memory, routine behaviors, or can be used as muscle memory, and houses a reward center of the brain that helps encode habitual behaviors and learns from conditioning and positive negative reinforcers. And the reason why I'm giving you guys these definitions like this off the script is because this is science. This is not something social and you can just talk about it. This is science. One thing that medical doctors don't do is that they're not if you go into your medical doctor and ask him if he knows the impact of the ACE study on your life, on your physiology, and he doesn't know the answer, chances are you might need to get out of there, because the impact of ACEs on our physiology, you guys, is devastating. It can paralyze. That's the reason why a lot of our community of color have cancer, especially liver cancer, have all these chronic illnesses and disorders, and are so susceptible to the COVID-19. Another part of the brain, that the mammalian brain, is the limbic system, and it's housed in the midbrain area, right above and between the brain stem. So at the base of your neck is your brain stem, and right above your brain stem is your mammalian brain. And this part of the brain regulates human emotional responses and understanding of attachment. Understanding of attachment is huge, you guys. We're talking about adverse childhood experiences, but what's before the adverse childhood experiences, and what we're going to talk about next week, is adverse babyhood experiences. And this is where this comes from, where it talks about attachment. Okay, overall, this part of the brain is involved in most typical trauma responses. The thalamus is linked with the brainstem and receives sensory input from the external world. And this part of the brain is unique due to its activity involving all levels of the brain: the brainstem, the limbic system, and the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is our thinking part of our brain. And so it's activated at the age of 12, and it's not fully matured until the age of 25. And then we have the hypothalamus, which regulates all the autonomic nervous system responses. That's the sympathetic activation, increase in heart rate, and the parasympathetic decrease in heart rest, body temperature, food, drink intake. This is the most important part here, you guys. This is where anxiety and depression live at, right here in our autonomic nervous system. So as we go further and further into this, you guys, a lot of us are sitting in a lot of stuff that they keep talking about mental health, but it's actually not mental health. It's actually called relationships. And so what's going on is that our ventral vagal, or the part of our vagus nerve that's part of the polyvagal theory and part of our autonomic nervous system, hasn't been attuned and attached right because of our adverse babyhood experiences that happened in this environment, in the three realms of ACEs, when we was babies. So when you look at this tree, and if you're in a household and there's a lot of arguing and there's a lot of anxiety and depression, and you got low wages, so then what happens is your mom secretes cortisol and norepinephrine and adrenaline down on you while you're a baby in the womb. So this compromises your HPA system. So in essence, you guys, neurobiologically, we've been set up. Does that make sense, Dre?
Yes. So basically what you're explaining is trauma becomes genetics in time.
It's part of genetics, but trauma is trapped in the body. And so that's the reason why you're going to a whole new modality of care nowadays, and that's somatic experiencing. So a lot of people right now who have developmental trauma and trauma are actually going to therapists that practice in somatic experiencing. And the somatic experiencing, it includes the mind, body, and brain. And so what happens is that our autonomic nervous system is the one that triggers our parasympathetic and our sympathetic nervous systems.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is a lot of information, So when we're talking about, these experiences, when I'm looking at the research, one of the, I'd say, adverse childhood experiences that affects our people the most is neglect. Something as simple as neglect has such an impact on our community. Myself, I don't know my biological father. I'm pretty sure at some point that neglect has affected me, and become a part of my genetic and biological makeup, as I get older along in my life. So with that being said, what is, from your perspective, how has neglect impacted our community, through systematic racism, mass incarceration, kids being separated from their fathers, et cetera, et cetera. Some of those symptoms of that neglect. How do you see that affecting our community, and how do you see that? What are some tactics that you would suggest in counteracting that neglect? Because from what you're explaining to me is that with our three different brains, breaking down the science of it, uh, from what you've explained to me offline, is that there's ways to kind of counteract some of the trauma and the issues through natural pathways and medicines, that affect us on a day-to-day basis.
But here's the underlay for the overplay, but it's not going to happen until we show that the foundation of our healthcare and our communities are founded on healthcare. And it's just real simple. Our healthcare impacts our whole country. As a matter of fact, I have a impact inequity report on Washington State, and it talks about inequities compounded over a lifetime across generations. Compared to white peers, Black Washingtonians are 16% less likely to receive prenatal health care, 150% more likely to die in infancy, 30% more likely to be taught by a less experienced teacher, 11% less likely to graduate from high school, earning 74 cents on the dollar, 45% less likely to own a home, accumulating only 87% less than net worth, and 66% less likely to transfer wealth to the next generation. Did you hear me? 66%. Did you know that in the state of Washington, healthcare, predominantly Black neighborhoods are disproportionately exposed to high levels of toxic waste and air pollution, which can result in higher risk for adverse health conditions? Black patients in Washington attend routine checkups more often than white patients, but receive fewer routine preventative services like flu shots and prenatal care. More than 1 in 5 Black U.S. residents avoid seeking health care due to concern of racial discrimination. I can attest for that in my fight for life in getting my cancer resolved. I had to literally walk around with Veronique Mead's facts and sheet on chronic illness in order for the doctors to even listen to me. Education, Black students in Washington are 30% more likely to be taught by less experienced teachers. Black students in Washington are suspended from school at more than 2 times the rate of white students. And national research indicates that despite having identical transcripts, the likelihood that Black students will be recommended for advanced courses is 13 percentage points lower than as white students. This is a research study in the state of Washington, you guys. Criminal justice in state of Washington, Black Americans are 43% more likely to be pulled over and 2.3 times more likely to be searched once pulled over by law enforcement. All this, you guys, is underneath healthcare. If we start having better healthcare, we can be able to have better attachment and better attunement with our children. So it says, and how are all the children? When you look at the 3 realms of ACEs here, how do you think the children are? If you're looking at all this stuff inside the household, all this stuff inside the community, and then all this stuff you got in the environment. Look at us right now. We can't even go outside without a mask on. There's so many toxins and there's so many things that we could prevent and do if we just had basic information. If we got rid of the white body culture and start having a BIPOC culture, or just a culture for the organism of the species that we are, and that's men and women, and to be valued at who we are in the skin, except how we are, winning out here in the community. And so we're basing our lives based on economical stuff when we should be basing our lives built on love.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What you're saying, I can attest to. I can tell you a story about when I was first going for my transplant way back in 2012. Because as I'm looking at the statistics, medical neglect is on this list of issues that really we should just list them all out. We have medical neglect at 2%, straight neglect at 67%, physical abuse is 16%, psychological maltreatment, and sexual abuse. Those are the types of maltreatment that we experience, waking up through our 24-hour day every day. So before I go into my story, I want minorities to know that if you're a walking, breathing black person, you've probably experienced trauma. You probably have a level of PTSD, even if you've never been called the N word in your entire life. You have to understand that wearing the skin, walking through your life every single day, there's a responsibility that comes along with that, and a I'd say what do we say, a different America that we live in, that causes a lot of these types of maltreatment that manifest themselves until we're much older. So back to my story is I can tell you straight up, trying to just go for a transplant through the VA. I know I was sent through the system 3 times. They had me go and stay up at the VA. They made me stay there for about a week. I went through every single checkup, passed every single check, went through all the intake, and soon as they found out that I was the perfect candidate, then they would do things like, oh, let's make them go through 4 months of piss tests. So
Right.
there's a, like, people think that you just wait on a list for
Right.
a new transplant, but no. When I tell you the bias and,
Right.
and that's running rampant through our healthcare system, it's not a rumor. It happened to me.
Yeah.
When I applied to get into the transplant program at the VA, it took me 3 years. I was 31 I think I was 31, 32 years old at the time. I didn't drink. I didn't smoke. I took my medicines on time. I was, I was very, very, on point with all of my regimens. And it's like for 3 years, they kept adding, take piss tests. Oh, we lost your paperwork. Oh, you got to start the process over again. They sent me to Oregon, where I had to stay in Oregon for a weekend and go through the same type of intake process, where they flew my little brother out from, he was staying in Atlanta at the time, flew him out to Atlanta, had me stay in the dorms at the Portland VA, only to tell us that after we were there for a day and a half going through the intake process, that it wasn't valid because my brother was too young at the time. He was 17 years old. He was actually a few days away from being 18. If they'd have waited a couple more days, he would have been basically valid. But because he went through the intake with me as a 17-year-old, it was invalid, which is fine. I get it. But all in all, to say at the end, once I got frustrated with the process, I started asking questions. I started calling around, calling different advocacies, calling down to the Portland VA, only to find out that they had stuck a mental evaluation in my medical records. I had never seen a psychiatrist in my life. They had a whole bunch of like records and stuff that they said I did, and tests that they said I run, that which disqualified me for a transplant that I never took. I remember calling down to the Portland VA and asking a lady questions about my medical records and saying, none of this stuff makes sense. Like, tell me, why am I not qualified for a transplant? And I'm checking off all the boxes. When I go into my medical records, so I pull my C file. None of this stuff in my original medical records matches up with what you guys, the transplant program, put into my file. I frustrated that lady so much that she broke character. She on the phone told me, a black man, that we're a conservative group and we're fine with how we do things around here, and hung up the phone on me. That was me at that point, fighting for my life, sitting on dialysis 3 times a day for a week, 4 hours a day, trying to figure out why they won't give me a kidney. After that phone call, I knew that it was time for me to cut ties with what was going on at the VA, and I went to Swedish. Within 9 months, Swedish had processed me, took a look at my paperwork, found out I was a perfect candidate, transplanted in less than a year. That's the type of bias that it's not a rumor. I dealt with that as a veteran. The VA did that to me. The soldier that they're supposed to be taking care of and making sure that Yes, he did serve his country. Yeah, he did sacrifice. We should at least, at bare minimum, give him proper medical care. And I couldn't even receive that. So, yes, I relate to everything that you're saying to right now, because that right there, that incident right there, causes a level of emotional trauma. That caused me to get sick. That caused me to be in and out of the hospital. It caused me to, be nauseated every day because of the stress. The stress of just dealing that with that alone was killing me faster. So, yeah, that's just what I had to share, as far as the information that you're presenting to me today.
And wow, we just have so much work to do with this in the community, and I know it's about time for us to close up for this evening. If anybody has any questions, or if they want to stay tuned to next week, there's a plethora of information here that you guys don't know. Epigenetics is involved. The neuroscience, neuroplasticity is involved, nutrition's involved, understanding that our brain and heart speaks, and our brain and our body speaks in four different ways. We have neurological communication, biochemical communication, biophysical communication, and energetic communication. A lot of us don't even understand that the food that we're eating doesn't even have the minerals in it in order to support our neurotransmitters to communicate through our blood. You guys are eating food that really is not even good for our bodies. I'll go into that next week, but I have some statistics here that I want to quote to the population. But we need to create self-healing residential communities for the BIPOC community. And it's not just BIPOC. Anybody who wants to live their life based on an anti-racist platform, this is a place to come to get the information and the education and the tutelage to be able to pull yourself out of chronic illnesses and despair that's created by the domestication and the dream of the planet. Let me say that once again. That's created by the domestication and the dream of the planet of the white body culture. When you start listening to the culture of your ancestors, you'll begin the healing process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I absolutely love talking about healthcare from a Black perspective, because it's actually very different from white perspective. We have the same healthcare problems, but at a definitely at a higher rate, at a more concentrated rate. And a lot of our, like you said, our physical and biological makeup has to do with the emotional trauma that's passed down from generation to generation. So I appreciate what you've given us for these first two episodes, as far as an introduction to the subject matter. I will inform everybody that we will get into classroom sessions starting next week. We're going to really start digging into the meat of the information. I'm bringing my pen and my pencil. I encourage everybody here, if you have any questions about the perspectives of myself and Mr. White, please understand I come from an experience perspective and he comes from a scientific breakdown, know the information like the back of his hand. And we try to, take that information and present it to to everyone in a way that they can understand and question us, because we're not here to tell you that we're right. We're here to tell you that this is a journey, and we hope that you take the time to and hold hands with us as we go through it.
Yeah, excellent, Dre. Yeah, because it's all about adverse childhood experiences, because that's the underlay for the overplay. Because what they've been doing is separating the Black man and their family, separating them from the wife and their children, and they've been oppressing us through the three realms of rape cases. Every day, every night, you can look on this infographic right here and see all the ways that you're being oppressed. And so, unless we start addressing our healthcare information, education through a trauma-informed lens or perspective, we're not going to get the respect we need in order to protect our bodies from this environment and from this white body culture. And we need to start doing the reps to heal when we start doing this work. It takes 21 reps, you guys. And if you're a little misconstrued, get Resma Menaken's book, My Grandmother's Hands, and you'll start understanding a little bit more about how important it is for us to take a look at our healthcare from a different perspective, and that's from a cultural perspective. I want to thank you guys. Thank you, Dre.
Thank you. Thank you. Once again, Federal Way Black Collective, I cannot thank you enough for creating this platform for minorities to fellowship and culture. See you next week. Health and Wellness Mondays.